All right, perfect. So this is our second webinar today, and second webinar in the history of FasterCourse, and also second webinar for me in my life. So please don't be so harsh on your critique. I'll try to do my best. Okay. So first of all, the webinar is called E-Learning Development 101. My name is Karlis. I founded my first e-learning company back in 2007. It is still around. It's called Novitus. And around 2014, I founded FasterCourse, which I guess is the reason why you guys are here, because you probably heard about this webinar through FasterCourse. Over these years, I participated in dozens, if not hundreds, of e-learning projects. And I also did 2 more startups on the side. Both were IT technology startups. And over these years, you could say I have had my fair share of shit. So the aim of this webinar is to share the knowledge and experience I have gained in these years so that you guys would have basically less shit to deal with in your e-learning. Very briefly about FasterCourse. We help people create better e-learning. We believe in good design, quick usability, and fun learning. We are a team of 10 people and have clients in 45 countries. I promise that this will not be a sales webinar, so if you want to find out more about our products or prices, please visit fastercourse.com or drop me an email, karlis@fastercourse.com. Okay, today's agenda about FasterCourse and Karlis. We already have covered that, so good job, everyone. And then we're going to talk about where to start. Do we even need e-learning? We're going to distinguish between a platform and a content, which in my opinion is a very important question for anyone who's just starting their work in e-learning. Then we're going to touch on 3 ways of creating content. And finally, we're going to finish with sources of inspiration and new knowledge. And we'll do also a question and answer session. So as I said before, you can ask the questions if you have on the way in the chat window. And at the end of the session, we'll also have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. Okay, so we have the idea that we need e-learning. Okay, so where do we start? And here are a few examples where we might feel like we need e-learning. So first example is the one which is very common nowadays. Face-to-face training has stopped. So should we move all of it to e-learning course, right? Or maybe a video conference is enough. So what I want to say is that we need to think this through. Before running to making an e-learning course, we really need to think about alternatives. Because in our experience, creating e-learning content is very time-consuming, and it's a big investment in terms of time and resources. Our very rough estimate for 1 hour of e-learning, if you create everything from scratch, is 200 to 250 hours of development. It includes script writing, design, graphical design, e-learning development, quality assurance, review rounds, project management, etc. So it's a big investment. Another example where we feel we might need e-learning is that management says that we need an e-learning, right? And before jumping on to making an e-learning course, we should be very careful, and we should make sure, at least this is how I see a good line of thought, is that is the management aware of the other options for solving learning needs? Do they know that building a course takes a lot of time and resources? And so it's, again, very important to think. Next example of where we might need an e-learning is a compliance issue. Okay, so for example, you work in a bank and you need to train all your colleagues on anti-money laundering procedures, and it's required by law. This sounds like a legitimate argument, but then again, we should think about, is e-learning in this case the most efficient way to comply with the legal requirements? In very many ways it will be, but in some ways it won't. If for example, the bank is very small, it doesn't necessarily need, not always we will need a separate custom-made e-learning course. Maybe we will need a legal document and a summary, and the employees need to sign it. In some cases, I have seen AML courses where you have like 100-page page flipper where you just need to go from one page to another with the next button. I believe the learning value is very close to having a summary with a signature to such e-learning course where there's no interactivity, no learning, and no tasks. Okay. Another example where we might need an e-learning course is, hey, we had an e-learning course before, let's make a new one, right? It sounds logical, but then again, processes change, businesses change, organizations change. Maybe we had a course before, but now maybe we have an opportunity to create a new method or new process that will become more intuitive, and maybe learners will understand it like this. And instead of just creating new e-learning content, we always need to think maybe we can just update the process, and then there is no need for a course. Sometimes a poster on the wall will work just fine. I was telling an example that we have been approached by a manufacturing company who have 1,000 employees working in a plant, and when asked if they have technology access, they said they had 2 computers and they can allow their employees to visit those computers one by one. And then we suggested that, hey, maybe you don't need an e-learning, or maybe not all of your learning needs to be e-learning. Some of it can be just posters, because those posters on the wall will probably get more eyeballs than that e-learning course that you will show to your employees for 30 minutes per year. So that's another example for an alternative. Sometimes we don't need e-learning, we just need to change internal procedure, make it more intuitive. Because my fundamental belief is that we shouldn't create e-learning or learning for itself. If we can make something more simple by design, where e-learning is no longer necessary, then that's much better than creating something crappy and then adding an e-learning course to it. Sometimes a good email or video is just enough. We can just send a video or a very good email, and that will be fine, and we don't need an e-learning course. Sometimes we need a one-page explanation and a signature from an employee that he or she has understood and will comply. So this is a compliance issue. Sometimes an infographics will work just fine. And sometimes, frankly, we just need to tell the management or the client just to back off, because not everything can be solved by e-learning. Okay, but there are cases when e-learning is necessary, right? So, for example, we have identified a learning gap, and after doing analysis, we are sure that an e-learning course is the best way how to meet learners' needs. And then we should create an e-learning course. So my main point in the beginning of this webinar is that we really should analyze first before creating an e-learning. Okay, so we need to create an e-learning course. So now what? Before we go to that, I want to make sure we all are on the same page regarding one question which I get all the time from people who are just starting to work in e-learning, and I get it from like 80% of the people. And I have a feeling that about those other 20%, at least some of them, are too shy to ask this question. So the question, which is very important, is to understand the difference between a platform and content. In this diagram, we have shown like a ship, which is meant to be the platform, which delivers stuff. And then we have content, which is the boxes here on the ship, right? So I'll try to explain the difference between platform and the content. So platform, also known as LMS or Learning Management System, LXP as Learning Experience Platform, or platform, there are some other words too, which can mean the same thing. Usually is good for several things. One of the things, it ensures user logon and authorization. So you can make sure that John and Nancy and Lucy has access and that they can log in and authorize themselves. Okay. Second, platform ensures content curation. So you can make sure who learns what and when. Some advanced platforms also allow suggestions. So for example, if you have passed 3 courses, they will suggest the next course for you, either based on your progress or maybe based on if they have a large user base. Some really advanced platforms can also suggest next courses based on other learners' data who have done similar courses as you, kind of like Netflix suggestions. Third thing, what platforms do, and that's a very important thing, is learner tracking. It means that the platforms can track who has studied what, when, how long, what was their result, did they pass the test, did they pass the course, etc. This is very important for compliance courses, but also for other courses. And this will be typically what the management will want to see. Has everyone passed, and what was the result, etc. Finally, some platforms also offer content creation. Usually this functionality is quite limited, so we don't suggest to use it. We suggest using platforms for this authorization, content curation, and learner tracking, and create content in software that's meant for creating of content. Okay, I have one more explanation, which is, I think, very, very important, and that's the tracking part, right? So how does that happen, and why is that important? So one of the ways how we can create content is, and I will touch upon it later in this webinar, is using authoring tools. But you can use any tool you want, or you can even develop the course or module yourself. The thing is about tracking is that your course needs to be published in a way that complies with one of the standards. There are several standards. The most popular is a SCORM standard. There is also XAPI, AICC, CMI5, and probably more. But the SCORM is the most popular and kind of like the industry standard, at least now. The other ones are gaining popularity too. But the idea is like this. You publish a course. In this standard, it gives out a zip file or zip archive. You upload this one zip archive to your learning management system, and then learning management system can communicate with your zip archive and can understand if John, Lucy, or Nancy has seen the course, when they have seen it, how long time did they spend on the course, did they pass the test or not, and what was the result. And it's all done because the course was formatted in a specific format, in this SCORM, XAPI, or other formats. So this is very important for tracking. If your course is published in these formats, LMS will be able to talk to it and therefore get the data. So that's a very important thing. Here is a screenshot of a real LMS, how you can see how the user progress looks like. You can see the courses, you can see when they have passed, and diploma, etc. Okay, so we have understood a little bit about this ship, right? Let's talk about the content. So the content is the actual e-learning module or course that you upload to your LMS. It can consist of images, texts, videos, tests, interactive tasks, games, virtual reality, augmented reality, you name it, lots of stuff. But usually it starts with PDFs and PowerPoints. So what companies usually do, they install an LMS, or is it a Moodle, Docebo, or any other, and then they say, oh, we have actually already a lot of resources. Let's add all our PDFs and PowerPoints from our face-to-face training seminars. And then after a month, 2 or 3 months, they usually understand that nobody, and I really, really mean nobody, is going to look through your 100-page PDF. And nobody is learning from PowerPoint presentations also. And then things start to get interesting, because then they start to look at the other interactive stuff. And then they start to build some course modules which have more interactivity, maybe some games, maybe some tests, some interactive tasks, etc. That's at least our experience. So the content can be all of it. It can be PDF, it can be videos, it can be images, it can be texts. All of that is content that's put on your ship, which is the platform. All right? I'm going to show you an example of content, right? Really briefly, I have two examples prepared. All right, so we have an e-learning course we built for a local electricity company, and that's on energy efficiency. I'm going to show you how it works. So it's a little bit of theory and a little bit of tasks and tips. So you can click on these things and you get tips how to save energy, water, electricity, etc. So for example, here you can turn down the thermostat on nights and weekends, and you can see how much energy you are saving. This is about ventilation system. So you have some tips. And here you have a little task. If you lack fresh air in the room, in your office, you have several options what to do. You choose 3, and one sec. And when you're ready, you just click the answer option and see if it's correct or not. Well, this is not correct, so let's just continue. The same with light system. You have some tips, and then you have some solutions. You see some. One second, it's loading. You see some nice animation with some case studies where light system can be used more efficiently, right? You see there's an electricity consumption, and then you have some solutions. And if you use them, then the electricity consumption goes down. I wanted to show you one more example from this course. It's a game. It's my favorite one. It's one sec. It's called "Can You Survive a Year?" You're given $1 million, let's say, dollars. It can be euros. It doesn't matter. And you need to run a factory for a year. And in order to do that, you need to invest sustainably, because if you don't do anything, the money will run out, and that's the game mechanics behind it, and you will go bankrupt. Okay. And you can get all kind of bonuses if you invest wisely, like happy employees or smart employees, etc. So in the beginning of the year, you have $1 million, and every quarter you will need to make a decision. So I don't know. Let's do some I don't know, installation of solar panels, for example. Let's do this one. You see solar panels, you see the money is flowing away, and after 3 months we have less money, and we have to do a next one. And I don't know, let's do territory landscaping. Yeah, it looks nice, but doesn't really help us financially. And the next quarter, I don't know, let's do this one. And and then final quarter, we have a little bit of money left. We could quickly do, let's say, waste recycling. Okay. And we see, unfortunately, we didn't succeed. We didn't survive the year, and our factories ran out of money. All right. So Mo asks, how do they receive feedback on every decision they take in the game? Like, how do they achieve reasoning behind what they do and what they do not in order for them to learn the topic? Well, this is a simple game. The idea was that you just look at the cost-benefit ratio, and the whole idea was that basically you just need to understand that if you don't invest, you will lose money in the long run. That's the main learning, and that was added at the end in the next few pages. There was no individual feedback on each decision. There was a overall feedback about the game. Thank you. Yeah, this was in Storyline. Yeah. All right. Thank you for the feedback. All right, and then I have another example. This is more, you would call it more corporate. And this is a course we built ourselves. And this is a fire safety course in the workplace, but I think it's a good example of mid-level interactivity course, so that people who are not used to e-learning, you can see how it can typically look, right? So we have some basic theory and information about the course, how long it's going to take. We have some click and reveal interactivity. We see some actions that's happening. All right. So this is about the fire safety. You can see like why it's important and what are the responsibilities for employees and employers. Let's see what's else there. So yeah, this was built quite quickly, and it's basically a course template that we built. And as I said, it's not super advanced, but it proves the point and gives like an example of e-learning as it's typically. As you can see, there's some click and reveal, some theory, and also some tests at the end. Tests actually can be anywhere, but in this case, it's at the end. So you see how like a typical e-learning test looks like. Okay, so this is a quick example of a course, 2 courses, right? And I'm gonna go back to my presentation. So one more thing about when we speak about content, I think it's very important to distinguish 2 types of content. One is compliance training. Compliance training can be, for example, anti-money laundering. It can be food safety. It can be GDPR. So think all kind of training that you need to do or build in order to comply with the legal requirements. Okay. And the second type of training or e-learning is the skill building. And I think they are quite different. For example, I can tell an example of what our experience with the compliance training. So we had to build an AML course a few years back, and we really wanted to build something that's amazing, interactive and nice and super fun, and not like all those other AML courses, right? And then so we built it. Our project manager on the other side was really happy, but she said, okay, before we run it, we still need to show it to the legal department. And then the legal department came, and then they said, hey, guys, you haven't included this, this, and this, because we included it only in the extra read more section. And the legal department said, no, you need to include it in the main course content. So you need to add like 50 more pages to your course. And then our beautiful interactive course became like just a huge info dump, and it was much less fun for us and for learners, but that's the way it is, and that's reality with compliance courses, unfortunately, very often, because you need to comply with legal requirements. And it's really not always. Sometimes you can manage to persuade legal department to move some of the stuff to the read more section, but quite often they are stubborn, and then you need to just prepare yourself and your HR project manager that this course is not going to be super easy or super simple or super fun. And then the other part is the skill building, and that's where you build new skills. And it's like for example, leadership, meetings, how to hold efficient meetings, how to sales skills, customer service, all kind of skill building. So this is not really compliance. This is more about how to achieve more with the resources you have or the knowledge you have. There usually is more, you can add more creative juices and so on. But at least our experience is that the budget is bigger in compliance than in skill building, unfortunately. But hey, it can be, of course, very different from case to case. All right. So how do we create content? So I'm going to show you 3 ways how the e-learning content can typically be built. And before we go there, I would like to point out a few things which we need to address before we actually build a course. So the first thing with which we should start, at least in our experience, is that we need to understand the aim of the course. And we need to understand what we want to achieve, and we want to be as specific as possible. An example of a good aim. We had a client who was a gaming company. They were producing these games which you play on a mobile phone, like all of these kind of time waste games, basically. And they were a very big gaming company. They had about 100 million users and 2,300 support people in China, Japan, and South Korea alone. And of course, they had more in other regions. And of course, if you have 100 million users, you have a lot of support tickets, right? And one of the typical support tickets they were getting is that some players were being logged out of their accounts, out of their games, and they wanted to get back in. And for some reason they couldn't. And then they asked the gaming company to verify them and allow them to log in. So the support people had to understand if this request to get access to the game again was a valid one or is it a fraud, because there were some fraudsters there too. And so the aim of the course was to train the support people how to really understand if this is a valid request or it's a fraud. And the specific task and aim, what we defined was that we would like to have 7% less time on ticket. So time the support person spends on researching and answering the ticket, 7% less, and 5% better user rating. So the rating at which the user rates the support person. Why is this a good measure? First of all, it's really easy to say if it has been achieved or not, because it's numbers, and they can measure it. So they can see what is the time that usually a support person on average spent on ticket before the course and after the course. And they can also see the satisfaction rate of the users with the support they got. Because after every ticket, they will ask the player, how did they rate the support? So that's why it's a good example, I think, at least in my opinion. So regarding the aims of your courses, I think if you can be specific, that's always very good. So if you can, please be specific, and numbers are good in this case, because then you can see if you have achieved the aim of the course or not. And it can also help you maybe build the next courses, because it will be an easier buy-in from management, because they will be able to see, okay, we had this aim, we achieved it, that's great. So we'll probably achieve it next time too, maybe, we'll see. So first is aim. Second is audience. So you need to think about who is your audience, and what are their previous education skills, what is their computer literacy, access to technology. About 4 years ago, we had a course, or not a course, actually games. We needed to create educational games for a cable engineer company. So they had engineers all over the United States of America, and they were using their own smartphones to access those games, educational games. And so we had to build games that had very little screen resolution, so that any smartphone could, handle it. And games that also were in small file size. So because the engineers were, spread out throughout the country, and sometimes the mobile connectivity and the bandwidth wasn't very good. So they had to be small in terms of file size. Second thing is accessibility. This is a very big trend last couple of years, which we see is that you need to create courses that are accessible for handicapped people, so that's a very big thing. There are these WCAG guidelines, I believe they're called, and there are lots of authoring tools who are trying to comply with them, and lots of courses that are built that are trying to comply with them. Yeah, so what I want to say is that we try to comply as much as possible, but not always it's possible. Not always you can comply 100%. But accessibility is all about having, screen read, so that the course can be read, for example, by screen reader, that the color contrast is good enough so people with maybe seeing or disability can still see the content on screen and other stuff, so that you would be able to deliver a course also to people with disabilities. Another example is audio capabilities in terms of technology. We had a case with insurance company, which didn't allow us to build a course with audio narration, because the course was meant for people who are working at the front desk, so people working at the branches. And they felt that if people will put the earphones on and do the training, the customers will get angry, because the customers will think that they are not working and that the employees are just listening to music, for example. And so that was a limitation there. Another thing about audience, you need to think about design preferences. What are people used to? Like, is it more corporate style? Is it more playful style? Some people like instructional illustrated characters, some don't. So it's really, you need to see what's the audience. And of course, age and other background is very important to tailor your course to the audience you're working for. So always try to get as much background information as you can. Okay, so where were we? So we had aims, then we had the audience. Then third thing, which is also very important, which I would like to stress, is that we need to understand if the course is going to be responsive or non-responsive. And on the left-hand side, you can see a course which is responsive. It means that the course rearranges objects depending on the screen size. So if you have a smaller screen size, it will move the objects like this, and maybe make a text size bigger for easier reading. Non-responsive course also can be viewed on mobile phones and mobile devices. Basically, all courses nowadays can be viewed on mobile devices, but it will be what we would call adaptive. It means that it will shrink or expand depending on the screen size. And as you can see on the right-hand side, it's usually not a big problem if the phone is held horizontally. Unfortunately, it's a bit more difficult to read if the phone is held vertically. So responsive is what people usually prefer, but there is one issue, and why people are still not building all their courses responsive, and the difference, and that's because of the cost. So at least in our experience, the difference between the left-hand side and right-hand side is 50% of cost. So this one costs more, because you need to adjust for several screens, and it's more time-consuming to build courses that are responsive. We had a case now with one large US company, which we have built dozens of courses for them, and they started with responsive because that's the way to go, right? Responsive is a new thing. And then they did analysis that in their LMS, 0.5% people were accessing the courses on mobile phones, 0.5%. And then they made a decision to move to non-responsive courses, because it was way cheaper and way faster to roll out courses. And because they just said, okay, if it's 0.5%, let's not, delay everything just because of that. And yeah, that was their decision. So it's everybody's decision. Finally, so three things: aims, audience, and then if it's a responsive or non-responsive. Once we know this, we are ready to start working on scripts. Some people call it storyboards, some people call it manuscripts. It doesn't matter, we call it all those words. We distinguish between two types of scripts. One is on the left-hand side. You can see post-it notes here. It's an image from our office. This is actually our post-it notes. We worked on a course, I think it was negotiation skills or something like that. And what we do with the post-it notes, we write down page names. So for example, a course might have a welcome page. So we write welcome, put a post-it note on the wall. Then it might have aims. So you say, why is this course needed, and what will the learner gain from this course? So that's second page. Then maybe you'll have a theory page. So we put a theory, bam, on the wall. Or maybe you'll have a quiz or test or some interactive exercise. You put it as number 4. And you don't write more details, just this page names. And then once you have done it, you can easily map your content, and you can rearrange it and move it around, and if you can see how the content flows. And if it flows naturally, and it feels okay, then that's perfect. If it doesn't flow, then you can rearrange the content the way you like and adjust it. And the second, once you have this flow ready and you feel like this is logical, you know, like how the storyboard works, you should show it to your client or your subject matter expert or for approval. And once it's approved, then you can start working on a detailed script or detailed storyboard. And this is where you write all the texts in. You write the text that will be on screen, that will be texts on click, maybe the feedback texts. You add the images. You either describe the images if you don't have them yet, or you maybe add actual images. But in this detailed script, you add as much information as possible. And basically, all of the text should be in this script. And this is a very, very important document that you should also send for approval to your client or your subject matter expert. And only once this is ready and this is signed off, only then you should proceed with the development. At least that's our suggestion and experience. Now, when we have the script ready, we can move to the actual course development, right? And in the beginning of the presentation, I promised you three ways how to create e-learning content. So we're going to go to those now. First is course development from scratch. Historically, like 10, 15 years ago, lots of courses were created by coding. You can still create courses by writing lines of code in JavaScript, Adapt, or any other tools or frameworks. The downside of this is it takes a lot of time. Like a ballpark figure, at least in our experience, is that to create a one hour e-learning by coding from scratch takes about 200 hours in development. So that's a lot of time. Just the development time, not the scripting. Then second option is you can use some of the e-learning authoring tools, right? Authoring tools, this is a very bad comparison, and I try to avoid it if possible. But authoring tools are like you could say, for people who have just entered the e-learning industry, you could say that authoring tools are somewhat like advanced PowerPoints. That's not a very good way to describe it, and please don't quote me on this. But basically, they give you a more visual way of creating stuff. You don't need to write any code. You can drag and drop, add actions, triggers, etc., and make interactive content without writing a line of code. And authoring tools also allow you to publish for SCORM and other standards, so that your LMS would later understand your course and would see who has done it and when and where. Remember, we talked about this. But the bad part about the authoring tools is that you start with blank page. You would still need to design and program the course. Here are some of the authoring tools that are very popular. I would say the Articulate Storyline and Rise is currently, at least in our feeling, it's the market leader. Adobe Captivate is second. About a year ago, I think they were both on the same level. This year, it seems like the Storyline Rise has grown a bit higher, but maybe that's just subjective feeling. Trivantis Lectora was a strong third before. Now they're a bit falling behind. You could put them in the second column. But yeah, so these are the top three, at least in our opinion. There are very, very good others like iSpring, Domino, Adapt, Gomo, Evolve, Elucida. You can check them out. They are very good tools. Yeah, so about the tools. So if you say course development from scratch was 200 hours for 1 hour of e-learning. If you create with authoring tools 1 hour of e-learning, at least in our opinion, it's about 60 hours for the development. Then the third way and last way, which we are going to talk about today, is course development with templates. There are lots of template providers out there. The big advantage is that the design and functionality is there. You can choose the template you like, and you can save time on your designing and functionality of a page. So just to give you an example. So for example, if you start from scratch and you need to create a glossary page, glossary with maybe 30 letters, or 30 objects, and that you can click on each, and then there's a new click and reveal type of page is shown. Typically in an authoring tool, it can take you up to 2 days to create one page. And in template, you can just take the template and use it. And usually that's big time saver. And my feeling is that we all actually are using templates, we like it or not, because you don't need to buy templates. You can just start creating your courses in authoring tools from scratch. And once you have done maybe 3 or 4 courses, you will have content that you can reuse for your next courses. And you would have eventually have created your own template that you can use for your next courses. So I believe the templates is the fastest, the cheapest way of producing e-learning, and I think we all are doing it, like it or not. Either you buy it commercially, or you from someone else, or you create your own template, but you would still use it. The downside of the template is that it limits you, because it's kind of you can't do whatever. You need to use a template, and there are some limitations. Sometimes it's good when you have a subject matter experts who are just going crazy all over the place, and you really want to put them in some kind of box. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes you want those creative juices flowing, and you really want to create something amazing, some new games or interactivity or whatever. And if you don't have such template, then of course you need to create something from scratch. So there are, of course, both positives and negatives to the templates. Bam! We have almost reached the end. So this is my suggestion for sources of inspiration and further research. I'm a big fan of our Articulate community. I'm in no way related to Articulate. We are also following Lectora community and Captivate community. We are active there too. But Articulate community, in my opinion, is a great resource for all kind of knowledge. There are lots of people who are very active, asking questions, answering questions, etc. It's not only about Articulate products; it's about discussing how to build better courses. So it's a good source of inspiration, and also design inspiration. People put their templates and courses there, and you can check it out and maybe gain some inspiration for your courses. Then there are LinkedIn e-learning groups. You can find them quite easily. That's not a big issue. They're pretty good. There are some people I follow and I suggest. This is Tom Kuhlman and David Anderson. They work for Articulate. But then there is Mel Milloway, Kat Ellis, and Pug, who are just e-learning developers. Very, very talented people, I believe. And they put great stuff on LinkedIn. So I suggest following them. There is an organization called Elearning Network, and FasterCourse is a sponsor and industry partner to them. They're UK based, so if you're in UK, I suggest to join them. They are a really good organization. We were in a conference last year in November in London. I think it was the best conference I have been, or one of the best in terms of level of content. Very, very good, very high level insights, very, very interesting. And they do webinars now too, so it's pretty good. Then e-learning industry is a website that writes about everything, and usually it's too broad and not very specific. But if you're just beginner and you want to start out somewhere, it's a good resource in my opinion. And then also FasterCourse, we write blogs, and some of them are pretty good, so you can follow those too. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. You can reach me at Karlis@fastercourse.com. You can always write an email. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. So we are now in the question and answer session. So if you guys have any questions, please write them in the chat window, and I'll try to answer them. And you can also raise a hand if you want to ask a question with audio. I will try to give you the possibility to talk. All right. Thank you, Marcia. Okay, Mo is asking he's choosing between Captivate and Storyline 3. Which is better for clients and whom are needed more in the market? That's a very good question. We get all kind of inquiries, and Storyline 3. I'm a big fan of Storyline 360 myself, but the problem is that some people choose Captivate because of the pricing and because the Captivate can do responsive content. It's a bit buggy, but it can. So it's really a distinction between price, bugginess, and responsive content. So I can't answer which is better. I would suggest thinking about Storyline 360 instead of 3. So if your clients are more concerned about pricing, given the current situation in the world, that might be very well the case. You should consider also Captivate. I don't know. Maybe you can keep both tools in your disposal. You're welcome, Mo. If you have any other questions, perhaps, please write them in the chat window or raise your hand. Okay. Marcia, almost missed your questions. What is a good way to educate myself on guidelines for disability compliance? This is a very good question. And there are these, I would suggest trying to check. I know that Lectora has published their guidelines of how you can use Lectora to comply with the disability guidelines, and Storyline has done the same. So you can either Google WCAG, I think 2.1 guidelines, I think they're called. It's called AA standard or something like that. Or you can go through the authoring tools and write in accessibility compliance. And you should receive a quite detailed description of what you need to do to your courses to comply with the guidelines. Usually it involves adjusting tab order, adding alt text to your images. So there are usually very detailed things what you need to do. And the whole guidelines itself are really long, very broad, and I think it's not ideal in terms of learning them because you won't be able to implement them anyway. Here's, by the way, leave a shared Storyline accessibility guidelines in the chat window. So I think it's better to go not from the guidelines point of view, but from the Storyline, for example, or Lectora authoring tools, suggestions, what you can do to comply with the guidelines, because that's what you will anyways be able to do, not what the guidelines ask you to do, because the guidelines are here and the ability to comply with them is here. Yeah, you're welcome. First question from Don. Can templates be mixed matched, such as using one template to build content and importing another template with games and quizzes? It's a little bit difficult because we are trying to create template packages that will have as many template pages as possible, if you're talking about our templates, and which have similar design. So if the design is similar, then it's easy. If the design is not similar or it's different, then it's going to take you some manual work to adjust navigation, buttons, etc. So it's not super easy. Milan asks, do you offer an online training for course development? Not right now, but if you want, you can drop me an email and we can try to help you in any way we can. I create learning material in Plant, the similar one you mentioned with private mobile phones and 2 computers in Plant. Should I give up with e-learning? No, I don't think so. It's just some of your e-learning may be, used for other purposes, like, I don't know, a poster or something like that. No, of course not. You shouldn't give up e-learning ever. Katerina says, I think the online training e-learning course in Storyline on Rise would be good. I think so. I think Rise is very simple. You don't really need much training to do that. Storyline, yes. There are some courses. I know, for example, in LinkedIn Learning, there is a Storyline course, and there are at least 2 more. One is I forgot the name, but I can try to send you later those links. There are at least 3 courses on how to work with storyline. Yes, you can. You can export Rise and add the Rise course to LMS. Yeah. Thank you about the energy saving. Yeah, we made it from scratch. We worked with electricity company. It was a co-work in a sense that they had ideas, we had ideas, we put them together, we wrote a script, games, etc. Was a very good experience. I think Storyboard is pretty much maybe not the most critical. I think it could be the most critical part of the e-learning development. Yes, if you have a good storyboard and if you have the client or management who approves it and they are man of or woman of their word and they stick to this approval, then that's a very good start, because storyboard is it defines rules and it really helps in the long run. If you have a bad storyboard, it will mess up the review round process, and the client will just come back and forth with new suggestions of what to improve and change. So yes, I think the storyboard and script is critical, and also then sticking to it is very important. And you need to understand also in the beginning, talk about with your client or the management how the review rounds will come, because there will always be review rounds. You will never create a course 100% ready from first day one or the first time, but the review rounds, at least in our opinion, should be documented, and you should know how many will there be, because it also adds responsibility to the person who is reviewing. Because if they know that there will be only one more review round, then they will be very careful of that they will add everything to the list of changes they want. If they will think that there will be unlimited amount of review rounds, then usually they will just add a few things and they just, oh, okay, we will fix it later. And it's very expensive and very time consuming for the developer. Thank you, Elias. Yelena, yes, I think it's a question, because if you can create compliance training that is useful, and it's not just next page flipper. I have seen a few of those, and I think they are just useless. If you can create something better that conveys the knowledge better, then I think compliance training is great. But if it's just 100 pages of text and image where you need to click next, and then there's a 20 question test at the end, I think it's not very useful, and maybe just a overview and a signature is fine. That's my personal opinion. Milan asks about, my client is a bank, and what would you be the most important thing? It really depends on the learning need. I'm going to sound very vague, but it really depends on the situation. We need to know more. What do you and they want to achieve? But I think it's first define what you want to improve and try to put some kind of numbers on it, like what percentage of something should improve. Is it a process or anything else? Do you have any suggestions for the future webinars, and maybe you can say if you have any suggestions for me for this webinar, because as I said, this was very first webinar for FasterCourse and me actually. Thank you. Martin asks, do you use VR? We have, but not very much. I think it was 1 or 2 courses, and my personal feeling is that it is it is very useful in very specific cases. I have heard 2 cases where I thought that this is really great to use VR. One was people working on submarines. It's very expensive to send them there, so they do VR training first. And the second one is medical equipment. There are these machines which scan people to see if they have cancer or any other serious diseases, where you, I don't know how they call it, MRI, or where you are put into a machine basically. And I have heard cases when they are so much used that doctors are being trained to use them at 3 a.m. in the morning, because that's the only time when patients are not coming in. And then of course VR is great too, because you can not use an actual machine, but you can use the VR program. But for example, VR program on I don't know, how to answer questions on your job interview, I don't think that's necessary. You can do it in different ways. So okay, thank you, Yelena. More gamification. We have a few games in Storyline, answering to Katerina's question. Have you seen those? If not, you can try to connect after the webinar. I guess we are basically over for today. And thank you very much, everyone, for coming. And it was fun for me. I hope it was useful for you as well. And we might make a new webinar. Just if you have any ideas for the next webinars, drop us an email. And thank you very much for today. And with this, I would like to say thanks and goodbye.